Hey there folks, how you doing today? Have you, like me, seen a lot of movements lately being demonized and thought to yourself, I sure would enjoy getting a piece of that action, but how do I do it? Well, worry no more. I have a simple 8-step plan that'll show you how to demonize a whole movement. Ready to follow along at home? Let's go! I'm going to talk about some of the movements that matter to me. I'm focusing, because I'm a leftist, on Black Lives Matter, Defund the Police. And I'm specifically going to talk about my friend Taylor McNally, who is perhaps the most demonized demon I know. So that'll be an interesting thing. If you don't like Taylor, or if you don't like Black Lives Matter, it's probably a really good time to however, for the rest of you, this is a really good time to hit like and subscribe. Before I begin, as an aside, I don't want this video to be a definition of Black Lives Matter. Black people have voices. Turns out that's part of the whole thing about Black Lives Matter as a movement. They do not need me to speak for them. I support Black Lives Matter. I support Defund the Police. But I don't want this to be a 101 on what those movements are. At this point, if you don't know, you suck. I will quickly explain what Black Lives Matter means. It's very simple. Black lives matter. That's what it means. That's it. That's the whole fucking secret. Literally, all people are saying is that black people are human. Their lives are just as important as anyone else's, and we need to pay attention to that fact. It's not about black people are the only lives that matter. It's not about black people's lives matter more. It's about black lives are important. Maybe police should stop killing them. Anyways, here we go with my 8-step program. Your first step, always distort the message. So I'll use Black Lives Matter as the example. Black Lives Matter, as I mentioned, the intention was to draw attention to the fact that black people were being killed at the hands of police at far higher rates than anyone else in the US. In Canada, I think we can fairly say that black and indigenous people are pretty much on a par, but splitting hairs. Indigenous lives matter, black lives matter. The message is true no matter what. When we heard that as honkies, what was our reaction? All lives matter. All lives matter. Of course, all lives matter. That's kind of the point of Black Lives Matter, is to imply that black lives are part of that larger group called all lives and should be treated the same as all lives. And they're not. But when you say all lives matter, what you're actually doing is you're saying, sit the heck down. We're all the same. And it immediately denotes that you're wrong. That what you're asking for is more than what we have. You want special privileges now. That's the implication. It's bull stuff, because that's not what they were asking for. They were asking to stop being killed. If you consider Defund the Police as another example, maligning the message. So Defund the Police isn't about getting rid of the police. So if we take that budget, all the money that we're currently spending to buy these people their ridiculous army boy toys, and we use it to fund social services, mental health, things that will, help people and prevent things from escalating in their lives, or at least stand a chance of preventing things from escalating in their lives to the point where police need to be called. These are programs that actually involve before the police would be involved. We used to have these kinds of programs, or at least we had more of them. How many people need to die in a wellness check for us to go, we're not doing these well? There are better ways. And before anyone says it, yes, I would rather a social worker go into a room with a person who's having the horrible night that led to some death at the hands of the cops. I absolutely would have preferred a social worker in that situation, not because she couldn't have shot him, and I said she because clearly I'm still working on my inner sexist, because they're trained to de-escalate the situation and try to help. And people don't die as often. Does that mean maybe we should have a cop nearby? Maybe. I'm not the one deciding policy right here, but I will tell you this. Throwing a cop in that room is a guarantee that we're going to have a problem. The important thing to do when you're doing this demonization stuff is to discard what people's movement is about and sell a narrative that it's about something else. It's about getting rid of cops. It's about making sure that black people are better than us. It's woke culture punishing white people for whiteness. No. But that sells a lot better to the people who you want on your side, doesn't it? Step 2 is one where we're going to confront some moral dilemmas. Because discrediting a movement, generally speaking, means you're discrediting the people involved in the movement, which means that you have to find all the flaws, whether it's character flaws, historical flaws, things they've done wrong in the past, and you have to paint a picture of them as a terrible person. George Floyd, of course, is a good example. There's a picture of him on the screen right now. I wrote the outline for this before I realized that George Floyd's murderer is actually up on the stand defending himself. George Floyd was a black man who was killed by the police, an unarmed man murdered by an armed man. It's kind of an indefensible position. But that doesn't mean they didn't try. So they dug, and they dug, and they dug. And they found everything they needed to find on old George Floyd, I'll tell ya. Turns out, he used drugs. Turns out, he wasn't always a perfect paragon of virtue. Can you imagine? Crap. This is a ridiculous thing because no one is a perfect paragon of virtue. We don't expect anyone to be a paragon of virtue. We hold ourselves to those kind of standards. We just imagine ourselves as being capable of those kinds of standards so that we can then go, well, hey, these standards are totally fair and balanced because I hold myself to them. George Floyd didn't meet those. He's not worth it. You're going to have to pick a different dead guy that we killed to march behind because that one's kind of not good enough. Everyone's a filthy drug user at this point. I live in Canada. Weed is legal here. Everyone smokes drugs. I'm the only one not smoking weed right now. I mean, in the whole filthy country. My parents use marijuana. They use it for medical purposes, for pain management, sleep management, and for Parkinson's management. Depending on where they lived in the States, if they lived in the States, they would be criminals. And according to that theory, if they were pulled over and they seemed agitated, well, the cops would be perfectly okay with putting down my folks, my 80-year-old parents. I don't think they'd be okay with it, though. Do you? The idea that they're trying to sell is that every single person that the police kill is a bad person. Maybe. But that's not how the legal system works. Cops are not empowered murderers. We've allowed that. No-knock warrants, the militarization of police, all of these things have pushed the envelope farther and farther and farther. And they have created more problems than they've solved. But we can lie. We can claim that police lives were in danger because a wild and crazy drugger was on the loose, drugging around drugfully. And that's why they killed an unarmed man who was terrified. Enter my friend Taylor. Taylor is a strong, powerful, willful, determined, beautiful, fantastic, fun human being I've had the pleasure of knowing for a lot of years through the music community. Unless you believe that she's secretly Queen Antifa. I can't make this up, probably because, I have self-respect. So here's this woman who is strong and wonderful and good and human and very much in Calgary, one of the recognizable faces associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, we can't have that. A while back, someone thought it would be super funny to take this meme of Taylor where she's holding, I think it was a chalkboard or a whiteboard, or yeah, it was a whiteboard, I think, holding a whiteboard that said something. I don't honestly remember what it said, but it was a, hey, white people do better sort of a vibe. But they are funnier than that. So they erased it using Photoshop. And they wrote, probably in Comic Sans, a whole new message. And it included the N word. Because, ha ha, ha, she wound up trying to push charges. I don't believe that's gone anywhere. The police did an investigation, which is more than I expected. And they found out that, Buddy's account got hacked. Ain't that a... That meme was spread around to diminish her, to caricaturize her. The other thing that gets shared around about her is her violence. Because, Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they're violent movements with violent people playing violence on violencing violence. So violent. And she is in fact being charged because of the violence. Let me do a little dramatic recreation. Okay, so they're at a conversation. It wasn't a protest. It was a conversation with, what were they called? Rural Canadians Against Racism, I think was the Rural Albertans Against Racism. Something like that. I can't remember. She used to run the group before they became part of, I think, the larger collective called Inclusive Canada. But I'm going to screw up the name because that's what I'm good at. Rural Albertans Against Racism. So she's at this what was supposed to be a conversation, and a whole bunch of happy goddamn patriots rolled up. Her partner came over with a restraining order, if I understand correctly. Handed him the restraining order, and some other from that same group of patriots smacked him in the face. Just full on right hook to the side of the face. JF is unexpecting. He's just literally take these papers. That is unacceptable. That is assault. The RCMP saw it and they were like, well, there's good people on both sides. Later that day, this one dude comes up with his phone and he's all like, in her face with his phone. And she had enough and slapped his phone out of his hand. No, not the best plan. Not a good look. But not assault. Worst case scenario, if his phone broke, she'd buy him a new one. And I don't mean she'd do that out of the goodness of her heart. Fine. Charge her with breaking his heckin' phone. But no, charge with assault. Gonna have to go to court. That's stupid. From a guy who, like, a week later, I saw a video of him knocking the phone out of somebody's hand at our city hall and then kicking them. Justice is neat. Another thing to do, our next step here, elevate the worst actors, worst actions, worst takes, worst whatever. Find that thing that is the worst representation of what you're trying to demonize and make that seem like normal. This is just textbook. For Black Lives Matter, obviously, the worst of the things to be elevated would be the violent mobs and the arsons. Now, start with the arsons. The arsons, there's not been a lot of people burning down cities. Certainly not in contrast to how much that is being pushed as the narrative. There have absolutely been fires. Much like the violence that has absolutely happened, it has not been the defining point of Black Lives Matter or of the people involved. It's easy from outside to be like, oh, that's never right. But that expression of frustration, that expression of rage, I can't speak to that. I can't. I'm not gonna. The key is to find those things that you're pretty sure you can sell to the vast majority of people as being unacceptable and making it look like that's the norm. 93% of the protests that have happened for Black Lives Matter have been totally nonviolent. 7% have had violence. A lot of that violence has been begun by either the right-wing militias or the police. I mean, not like the police aren't a right-wing militia. Promoting the idea that this is Black Lives Matter is not just irresponsible, it's completely untrue. But it doesn't have to be about the truth. The truth just gets in the way when your focus is on branding a message that paints your opponents as dangerous. Another good example of this is the word feminazi. Feminism is an egalitarian movement. Feminism has been responsible for a great deal of positive social progress. There are voices in the feminist movement who are extreme. I have a picture on the screen right now of a meme. This meme is typical of the use of feminazi. And it's typical of what I'm talking about when I say that you're supposed to elevate the worst actors or actions or words or sentences or statements or whatever. The image of the shrill, angry, lesbian feminazi is a caricature. It's garbage. And presenting that as the norm, as this is what all feminists want. If I am a feminist, and I am, then as a man, I'm either a white knight cuck, or I'm a self-hating man who hates men and wants men to suffer because, I don't know, reasons. That's how this works. You take the absolute worst case scenario and you show it and you go, see, they're all like this. And the goal is to make the movement less relatable for regular people. It's a good step, that's step 4. Here we are already at step 5. Again, 8-step plan. We've only got a few left to go. Step 5, digging deep to looking for bad comparisons. And I have a great example for this one. I'm not going to show a picture of Canon Hinnett. I feel like his family's been through enough, and they have specifically asked to stop using him to derail the conversation about Black Lives Matter. I will respect that. But the behavior of what happened there, I think, is an important thing to understand if you want to learn how to properly demonize a movement. And I think we're all here for the same reason. So, a black man killed a 5-year-old white kid around the same time as George Floyd's death. The story became a meme, and the meme got shared far and wide by conservatives, by liberals, by alt-right folks. It was begging the question, which is never a good sign you're going to get some honesty. If we care so much about race, why aren't we talking about when a black man kills a white child? It's not the same thing as what happened with George Floyd. It's a terrible, tragic situation where a child was killed by a man. That is terrible, and I don't want to downplay that. That's not the same. The killer in this story was subject to a manhunt, was arrested, was tried, was convicted, and was sentenced in fairly short succession, which is how justice ought to go. But that leaves not a whole lot more to talk about unless the whole purpose is to talk about how terrible some mentally unwell people are, or some black people are, or whatever, if we want to beat the dead horse, as it were. George Floyd's death is very different. We knew who did it. There was no justice. There was no long manhunt. There was no quick arrest. There was none of that. Literally, people watched a cop kill a guy and get into his car and drive away. We're here all this time later, and we're finally seeing the case go to trial. Not the same situation. George Floyd was killed by the authorities. That kid was killed by an unwell person. Both are tragic. One is systemic. We could have helped that killer. It would have been through the things I talked about earlier, social services, mental health. I don't know the specifics of what went wrong in that situation to create it. I'm not going to comment on that. But we could have helped if those services were in place. The money for social services and mental health would not have stopped that cop from killing that man. That happened because of systemic racism. That's all there is to it. That's why it's important that we talk about George Floyd, and less important that we talk about Canon Hinnett. That is not to diminish his family's pain, but one of them is representative of a much larger problem. It is not remotely a valid comparison. But throwing it in people's faces makes them backpedal and have to go, oh, I didn't know about that. And it takes that moment to distract away from George Floyd. Because that's what you're doing. You're demonizing a movement. You're saying, you guys care about this story, but not this one because a white person was involved. Garbage. We're here at step 6 already. Step 6, coming at you. Counter-protest, loudly, often, and wrongly. It doesn't matter if you're right. All that matters is you're loud. There was a fantastic example of this with our local Black Lives Matter group. There was an incident, I believe it was in Balzac, but I could be wrong about the town. But they were at the side of the road, and someone specifically veered their vehicle to hit them. And they did hit somebody. Fortunately, that person wasn't seriously injured. And there were memes afterwards, yucking away about hitting this guy with a truck. Great. Then they had, a week or two later, they had a press conference to discuss this incident and to talk about it. But they couldn't, because out came the good old Patriot boys coming on down. They stood up right all around them with megaphones screaming, "Go away, Antifa. Your violence isn't welcome here, Antifa." And again, the violence was a person on their side of the argument driving into people. Antifa's violence is unacceptable. Okay. Antifa. A press conference didn't happen because people shouted it down. And then they went home feeling very solid about their humanity, driving away in their big-ass trucks going, "Yep, kept those coloreds from being uppity." When they were there to discuss an act of violence, have a press conference. Whatever. They have a right to speak, those Patriot boys. They absolutely do. And they use their right to speak to shout down other people. Also their right. Doesn't make it okay. But it worked. Can't argue with the results. Used to be the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Now I think it's coming down to the louder they are, the righter they are. At least in the current discourse. And that's a problem. Virtue signaling. Every single one of us does it. I do it. I might be doing it right now. I don't even know. I'm sure that if anyone sees this video, there'll be plenty of comments about how I'm doing nothing but virtue signaling. And, white knighting and blah, 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 blah. Virtue signaling is when we say, hey, I don't like that thing that is being done because I'm better than that. When someone says Black Lives Matter and you immediately go, yes, I agree, Black Lives Matter, and what about black on black crime? What about that? You're virtue signaling. You are implying that this culture, these people, are needing to change, needing to pull themselves up by their bootstraps because their violence is so much more so, and it's completely because of who they are and what their black culture is. Not a very accurate take, though. Black on black crime largely is the result of black people being concentrated in neighborhoods together, and those neighborhoods being largely poverty-stricken. That generational poverty thing creates depression, creates despair, creates no way out. This is the image that a lot of kids are being presented with in varying poor neighborhoods. And this happens with white kids too. White kids have the advantage of their skin color won't stop them from getting a college education or getting a trade or getting becoming a doctor. But the kids who grow up in poverty typically grow up fighting. A lot of crime happens in poverty-stricken neighborhoods. When you isolate people like that, their crime is against each other because that's who they see every day. That's who they're taking their despair out on. It's not okay, it's not good, but it's real. So the problem with black on black crime isn't that black people are bad. It's that our system is structured in such a way to keep black people in their ghettos, to keep indigenous people in their reservations, to keep everyone where they are so that they don't spill out. People talk about Detroit as an example. And they go, yeah, once upon a time, Detroit was a really white city. And then the war happened and everyone went off to war and they invited up black people and black people took over the jobs and just ruined the city. And now it's just a black ghetto. That's a simplistic take. The fact is, they bribed black people to come up and do the automotive jobs because they were absolutely necessary. The minute people got back from the war, they were like, bye-bye, black people, and didn't bribe them to leave. Didn't give them the resources to go anywhere else. There were no other jobs. They just wound up unemployed. What happens when you suddenly have no job and nowhere to go and nothing you can do about it? Poverty. It's not that the city of Detroit suddenly turned black. The white people coming back were like, I don't want to be here. Look at all these black people. They're terrible and dirty. And here they are, all homeless and stuff. That's a really bad after the fact review of what happened. Black on black crime isn't quite such a simple thing. But it's a great virtue signal. Makes it sound like you've done some reading when you probably haven't. Well, if black lives matter, surely blue lives matter. Not the same thing though, are they? Black lives are people who are black. You don't have a counselor in high school tell you maybe you should consider being black. You don't enroll in African American Academy. When you're a cop, you're making a choice, and it's a choice you can unmake at any time. When you're a cop, you have the choice to behave like a cop or behave like a human being. And you make the choice to prop up the system, to maintain and defend the status quo. Fine. That's what you're doing? Cool. Don't expect to have the same reverence. It's like support the troops. When the Persian Gulf happened, I'm here in Canada. Everyone was very mad at us because we didn't go to war with you. If you remember back in history, they called them freedom fries because the French didn't go to war. My buddy Dongo wasn't able to order parts for cars from eBay because the eBay sellers would go, wait, you're in Canada? You didn't support us in the war. I ain't saying it to you, God damn it. The best comment on support the troops, in my opinion, comes from Sage Francis, the rapper, who said, you support the troops by wearing yellow ribbons, just bring back my motherfucking brothers and sisters. Because that is supporting the troops. All of these are all virtue signals. They are designed to shine the light of virtue on the group in question that you're trying to defend, and as a result, obscure and darken the group that you're trying to demonize. And it works. We made it to step 8, people. Made it to step 8. Terror is our dark secret as a society. We love horror movies. We love fighting the war on terror. We love ignoring the war on white terror. It's all gravy. Terrifying people is fairly easy. I'll give you 4 examples of simple ways to do it. One of them, doxing, where you take someone's personal contact details and make them publicly available with the usually behind the hand sort of oh, I hope no one does anything unlawful to them with this information. Ooh. You know what, buddy? If you hoped that, you probably wouldn't have posted it in the first place. I have never been doxxed. I will for sure at some point be doxxed. Guaranteed. Hasn't happened yet. I almost got doxxed. A group of animal rights people really didn't like me when I was writing my blog, and they were basically asking for people to dig up information on me. But I live in Canada, and I think that it died on the vine pretty quickly. right? Because it's one thing if I call you up and go, hey, haha, I'm coming to get you. It's another thing entirely if like the internet shows up at your house one day and they're like, want to fight? That kind of fear, doxing is like the simple first step to terror. Threats of violence. I have seen some of the messages, just a pinch of the messages that Taylor gets every day. I grew up a skinny wimp, bullied by everyone around me. Nothing I went through is even one day in her inbox. The perpetual threats, the constant, we're going to kill you, we're going to rape you, we're going to hurt you, we're going to take everything away from you, and you're going to deserve it. I cannot imagine what she goes through day to day. That's a tactic. Actual violence, I mean, it goes without saying. You have a free speech, free expression rally where it's really an anti-mask rally with Nazis scattered about. And some protester shows up and there's a fight. Several people who are actively training for exactly this kind of scenario beat the piss out of them. That protester is going to think twice. A person who supports Black Lives Matter but maybe is not black wants to go and stand with them, but now there's the fear of actual violence. You know what? I'm really busy on Thursday. And swatting. This one blows my mind. From what I understand, it started really with like video game culture, and people would like call 911 on a person who is playing a video game against them that they're wanting to get even at, and the police show up and kick in the door and yuck, 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 I win the game. That sounds, I don't know if that's accurate. That's how I had it explained to me, that this is what started swatting. But it's now a tactic. There is a leftist that I follow, Merrick, who is a porn person, a sex worker. And Merrick regularly, she's a leftist, regularly gets attacked by tankies and whatnot who do horrible, horrible things. Like they made a meme of her once. They took one of the YouTube video stills, and they changed the title to read "Why I Did the Nashville Bombing," and they circulated this right after the Nashville bombing when the police were looking for information. That could have had her killed. To prove what? An ideological point? You know, if someone sees, let's just say someone sees this video, someone from the alt-right or from a Nazi group or a conservative or whomever sees this and is really angry about it. I get that. I get I can be off-putting. But having someone call the police, kick in my door and put guns in my kids' faces, how is that an appropriate measured response? How is it that when we're using Black Lives Matter as a means to bring question around the violence of police, when we're talking about defund the police and saying there's got to be better ways to utilize a military force within our country, how is using them to prove the point a good idea? How is that good? When people are scared, they shut up. When people are scared, they don't step forward. When people are scared, they don't stop you from being an Maxwell. Because you're not being an Maxwell. To me, I'm not a black life. This is not my movement. If jackbooted thugs beat and kill them, they're not beating and killing me. This is the old, first they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not Jewish. It's a true argument. Not saying anything is a terror response, is a fear response. And I get it. We've all been scared. We've all been scared to open our mouths or to stand forward. Now's not the time. So here we are. We've learned all 8 steps. We now know how to demonize a movement. We've learned to dismiss. We've learned to discredit. We've learned to caricature. We've learned to elevate. We've learned to dig deep again with our bad comparisons. We've learned to counter-protest. We've learned to virtue signal. And we've learned to use the power of fear. And now, my children, We know how to demonize a movement. We know how to take the power away from people who want the world to be a better place. We want to stop progress in its tracks. Now we have the tools. Hot diggity.